Thank you for joining us for episode 102 of North Star's Private Equity Fast Pitch. Our host, Jeff Henningsen, president of Lockton Companies in Texas, will be speaking with one of our first podcast guests, Jester. Jay is a partner at Plexus Capital, a private equity firm with over $1.4 billion raised to date. Jay is a member of the senior leadership team and works to chart the strategy and vision for Plexus. He interacts with investors, assists with sourcing new investment opportunities, and helps oversee the portfolio. Before Plexus, Jay spent 19 years at Audax, where he served on the leadership team. Today they'll be discussing how curiosity conversations can help you secure your first internship or job in private equity, the best and maybe only way to develop your listening skills, and how a soldier's hunt for a dozen wedding cake eggs relates to private equity. And now your host, the podfather of private equity, Jeff Henningsen.
Jay, I am so excited about this podcast. I can't believe it's been 4 years since you joined me. You were one of my first guinea pigs in my project towards launching a podcast, which I didn't even know what it might look like. And now 100 episodes later, here we are. A lot's changed in your world, and I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about Plexus, tell us a little bit about yourself. And for those that don't know you, that'll be very interesting. But for those that do and maybe not have kept up with your career path, I would love to bring them up to speed.
What you're saying is I was podcast number 2 in this series, and now bringing it together. That's why this is 102.
That's it.
I feel so much better. I was sure that was you ribbing me about how bad I am at golf. That makes me feel a lot better. Okay. That's totally changed my perspective on this podcast.
Actually, I'm not sure that I've seen you shoot 102. It's been more than that, I think, right?
That's only if I count all the putts.
There you go.
Anyway, so yeah, I'm a North Carolina guy. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, went to school in Chapel Hill. I was an English major at the University of North Carolina, which I think is a little bit unusual in the world of finance. The first great opportunity I had was going to work for Erskine Bowles at a firm called Bowles Hollowell Conner, which I believe is like one of the OG middle market, non-Wall Street M&A firms back in the early days of the middle market. And I was an analyst there, drinking from the fire hose in downtown Charlotte, trying to learn. Actually, we didn't even have Excel at the time. It was Lotus 123, but learn the M&A, middle market M&A business from one of the early pioneers. If you go back and look up Bowles Hollowell Conner, Robinson Humphrey in Atlanta, that was a game-changing experience for me. I did 2 years there. Went from there. Next great opportunity was Glenn Oken. At the time, he was the third partner at Florida Capital Partners, which was a spin out of Chase and CVC, their small deal affiliate in Tampa, and got to go down and really learn mid-market sourcing from, I think, one of the original dedicated M&A professionals focused on sourcing was Glenn Oken, and spent 8 years in Tampa learning the mid-market buyout game. And then in 1999, Jeff Rennert and Mark Walpo, as they were leaving Bain Capital to found Audax and building up that team, they recruited me to come join as a managing director at Audax. You know, I kind of think about the first third of my career was Bowles Hollowell and Florida Capital and sort of learning the business and learning about the mid-market. The middle third was the 20 years that I spent at Audax, working with the founders to build Audax into, I think, just a juggernaut brand in the core middle market. Just an amazing 20 years to see what we went through in a bunch of different cycles and how that business has continued to grow. I got 2019, right after you and I talked on podcast number 2, sort of hit the 20-year mark at Audax. And I'll probably do what I always do as a little TMI here. I'd turned 50. I'd turned into an empty nester. I hit 20 years at Audax. And also meaningful to me is I lost my father. If you ask me the question of role models, he's number 1. And the epiphany I had was you get one lap around the track. And I feel like I had one other third of my career to go do something entrepreneurial. My wife's from Charleston. As I mentioned, I'm from Greensboro. I knew at some point I would come back back home to North Carolina and also back home to what I fondly call the dinky deal market. And I had the opportunity to come buy into the partnership at Plexus Capital, which is now a 17, 18-year-old SBIC debt-focused strategy, and just an awesome business. They've generated unbelievable returns, focused on really small deals with independent sponsors. And the idea was that I would come in and help the firm diversify and raise a controlled buyout fund to operate alongside that $500 million independent sponsor fund. And so that's what I've been doing really for the last 2 years, raising that equity fund. We had the final close at $204 million at the end of March 22. An interesting time to raise what's effectively a first-time fund for this firm during a pandemic over Zoom. Was really interesting, and we were thrilled to get to 200. That's the first 55 years of my life.
That's an incredible journey, and can't wait to watch the next, maybe not 55 years, 35 years, whatever it is. But I know it's going to be exciting. And I think, as we were talking before we started the podcast, one of the things that I've always been impressed with and watched you do at each of your firms is really approach everything in a very systematic and methodical process. And back in the day when I first got to know you during the Audax time, it was all about process. And you built process in a lot of areas, including business development, acquisition. And I'd love for you to spend a little bit of time, maybe giving the audience your thoughts on how to implement that within a deal world.
As an English major, you can orient yourself around stories and big ideas. Or another way to think about that is the heuristics. And sometimes the story that has the most impact on you, because it's the most exciting and most interesting story, can outweigh the data, right? So if something really traumatic happened to you, so let's say you did a massive investment in one particular industry, the heuristic side of your brain will go, never touch that industry again. It's a helpful exercise to really dive into the data and say, yes, there was one big bad deal, but that doesn't mean that every deal in that industry is a bad deal. I think I'm on the same journey that everybody else is just trying to be the best version of yourself. And even as a 55-year-old guy trying to figure out how to learn new stuff. And I think one of the best ways to learn new stuff is to first collect a ton of data. And that's one of the beautiful things about the lower middle market. In the core middle market, I think the addressable market is maybe 1,000 to as many as 3,000 deals a year. If you go up market to the huge deal market, there might be, 250 to 750 deals done in the US each year in the mega market. But where we live, in deals under 12 of EBITDA, especially if you add in add-on acquisitions, there are hundreds of thousands of targets and somewhere between 50 and 100,000 transactions that happen a year. And it's an unbelievably rich data set that you can study and just bring out huge wisdom and not do the mistake that I think a lot of people do, which is rely on the heuristics and, I've seen that before. Yeah, you've seen that before, but you've seen it twice. Let's go out and collect that data and really come up with the baseline numbers so that when you say it is hard to make money in that industry, you're actually speaking from a data set of facts, not just one person's opinions.
Well, maybe you can draw this back to Plexus and what your goals are with the new fund. Data is amazing, but you got to have data that's defined into where you're trying to go that leads you hopefully down the right path. What are the buckets of areas of focus that your new fund is targeting?
Well, let me start by saying what we're not. I think a lot of people will get a teaser from an investment bank, and that's the first they've thought about that industry. And I remember so many times over my career, there's one particular company, although surprisingly, I can't remember the name of the company, but I'm not going to name it. But they were the largest manufacturer of casino replacement parts for slot machines and stuff. And I remember seeing that teaser from a very well-known investment bank. And actually, I think we saw it from 3 or 4 different investment banks during my time in the core middle market. And I've sort of had 2 to 4 weeks to decide, do I want to make an offer on this to own it? you can do some research online, you can formulate an idea around that, but you're kind of throwing darts. You're with a whole bunch of other people that are thinking about that industry for the very first time. And a good investment bank will keep you moving very rapidly. And I think that's a hard way to make a really sound decision. And instead, what we're trying to do at Plexus, and we started off with a process, and we asked our most junior deal team members through our most senior operating partners, if you could buy any company in any industry, what would it be? And start imagining, not just reacting to a teaser, but start imagining what's a company that I would really like to buy and why, and put together a couple of pages. And we actually had a thesis contest. We started out with 22 different submissions that came from our CFO, it came from operating partners, deal team members, all down the stack, and we voted. We didn't say the partner votes are more than the associate votes. It was just wide open. And to study that data and to see how people connected with different thesis ideas. And we started off with 3. We've actually done deals in 2 of those areas. We've since added 4 more, and we have 7 sort of active thesis ideas that we're pursuing as a team. And teams are going out making industry calls. They're trying to meet executives. We've got an internal data project to turf up ideas. A couple of these are consolidations of very small and very fragmented businesses. It's not like there's a whole bunch of investment bankers sending us teasers on these areas, but start with those ideas and build a platform to sell into the white hot core middle market, kind of how we're approaching the equity fund and what we're trying to build.
Well, I love this idea that you just outlined, which is a thesis contest to build focus. And it's very similar to our business. Our lead partners and sales folks, we encourage them to pick a major and a minor, basically. So rather than just randomly, to your point, going after every teaser that comes their way and going to every single conference, no matter what industry it's in, really honing down to become part of the fabric of that community. And I think that's where you're going is, if you have very specific alignment in 7 different areas and your teams can become part of the fabric of those particular verticals, then things start to happen good for you because you start to get referrals from people who know you're in the space as opposed to just random things. And the longer you're pursuing that industry and starting to become really critical to that industry, then better things happen and you can execute better. And you also know when you shouldn't be executing, I would imagine.
It comes back to the first question you asked me around collecting the data. And as opposed to sitting back and saying, oh, well, I'm going to sit up here in my ivory tower of investment committee and wait for the perfect deal to float through our pipeline, it's get out of the tower, go to trade shows, talk to CEOs, and develop the pattern recognition and the data and the expertise to say, no, I want that. Or more importantly, I definitely don't want that. And I think to have that data set, and again, I'm not holding myself out as an expert in anything. Every CEO I interact with, they have forgotten more about their industry than I will ever learn. And I love that about Plexus is that it's a culture of humility. And I'll tell operators, we'll take an operating partner to a meeting. And one of the first things I say to the executive, because that can be unnerving when you show up with another executive, is this guy's not here out of arrogance. He's here out of humility. We know that we don't know enough about your business to ask the great questions that we want to ask. So we brought this person. And we know that we need to have a really high level conversation about the nuances of your business. So we brought this person. And to say like, hey, I've got a guy who's signed the front of a paycheck in this industry and understands your business on a much different level than I ever can. That's an important sort of nuance and approach to building up the story of why we think we're the best partner for the next chapter of your business.
It's interesting. I'm reflecting on my first 100 episodes and some of the qualities and skill sets that seem to be common that my guests have shared are important in the private equity world. And occasionally some of them will talk about Excel spreadsheets and being able to do all the formulas, but really curiosity and humility and those types of things seem to stand out. And when I was just imagining your younger folks, more senior folks out at trade shows, it takes a special type of personality to actually gravitate to doing that. And I know you have fun in that scenario. Talk about what it takes and what happens in that environment and what you're trying to get out of it.
I think it's a great life skill. Whatever event that you are stepping into, before you walk across the threshold, is ask yourself the question of, if somebody looked up my LinkedIn page and had the 30-second snapshot on my background, what would they expect from me and what would make them nervous about me? And private equity's got a reputation of sharp-elbowed, aggressive financial types looking for an arbitrage. And it's like every industry, you have your code words that unless you've been in finance, you never have a use for EBITDA. Like there's a bunch of things like that. And more mid-market CEOs and owners are getting familiar with the jargon, but it's unnerving. It's somebody that's coming from, in the most part, a different world with a different agenda. And I think before you walk into that trade show, to know they're not expecting me to be a nice guy. They're not expecting me to be a good listener. They're not expecting me to be humble about my knowledge of their industry. Try to figure out how to, I don't like the word disarm because that sounds disingenuous, but I think it is appreciate the label that's already on your head as you walk through the door and help people get comfortable of what your actual agenda is. Because if you don't establish your actual agenda, they're going to make some really bad assumptions and they're going to come into that conversation dukes up, defensive and closed. And I think if you can come in with a lot of transparency, a lot of humility, and I don't care if it's a trade show or a cocktail party, that sort of posture of transparency and in a disarming way, I think is the most productive way to interact with people that aren't in your day-to-day ecosystem.
Be a great time to ask you a question because it kind of plays into what we've been talking about college students, young professionals. I know that being who you are and that you've been in the industry for a long time, there's probably a lot of young professionals and college students that come to you and just say, hey, what advice would you give me? What should I be doing with my career? What should I be thinking? What are you telling folks like that today? Bring us up to speed as if anything's changed since the last time we did this podcast.
I want to brag on my daughter. She's the third year at UVA. It was a tough year to go find a meaningful summer internship. And she went out and got her name out there early in the year. And she called me. She's like, Dad, I feel like I'm having trouble breaking through. And we introduced this concept of, and I borrowed it from a book. I wish I could remember the book, but they called them curiosity conversations. And the idea is like, don't call up somebody like you and say, hey, Mr. Henningsen, can I have an internship? Because immediately, actually, you're different. You would probably just say yes. But most of the people I know will immediately start playing defense. I don't know who you are. I haven't seen your resume yet. We already have a process and you're a little bit late to the game. They start creating the foundation of why I'm later going to say no. But instead, call up and say, look, I'm not asking for anything except for a few minutes of your time. I just want to know how you got to where you are. Tell me about the choices you made in your life that got you to this point in your career and share your wisdom with me. And we did a couple together with my daughter. I set them up and then I went off and I was raising the fund and she was busy and doing other stuff. And it must have been, I bet it was 4 months later, she called and she says, Dad, I'm having a good time with these curiosity conversations. I'm like, that's awesome. That's great. You do a couple more? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, like how many? It's like 75. And she made a class of having curiosity conversations. And, the first two might have been somebody I introduced her to, but then she just played the networking game. And it was almost her measure of, am I doing them right? When the person on the other end of the line would say, you really need to meet so-and-so who's my competitor or my boss or somebody who used to work for me. And she created this amazing network and copious notes collecting her version of the data. And the punchline of the story is at the end of these 75 curiosity conversations ended up with one of the coolest internships in New York City of anybody I know in her age group. A globally recognized, I think she got one of 9 globally in this opportunity. And there's a side of me that was like, oh yeah, like I really, I wanted to make that introduction. I'm like, I had nothing to do with it, and she just, the network that she created out collecting the data and this mindset of leading with curiosity. I'm trying to think if I've ever been prouder. I've spent a lot of time, and one of the things I'm trying to do as an old guy is get better at learning and really trying to get better at changing my mind. And what I've realized is the most important life skill to be a graceful old guy is to learn how to listen better. And it's really hard. And I've actually been searching for a book about listening and how do you enhance that skill. And the only thing I can find is that there's not some special focus skill or meditation or anything. The only way to make yourself a better listener is to hyper develop your curiosity. And you have to, when you're talking to another person, you have to be thinking like, well, what made them say that? What makes them act that way? That's a really interesting perspective. I wonder where they got that. It is the only thing that I have been able to find on my journey that actually can make you a better listener, is to focus in on curiosity. And I'm sure I'm stealing that from Brene Brown. I'm sure she said that more eloquently somewhere else. That would be my number one piece of advice to college people is don't work on your presentation skills, work on your curiosity skills.
I love that. I love your daughter's story. And I'm sure my brain is thinking, why didn't she record those? She could have had a great podcast series.
Yeah.
But I'm glad she took good notes.
She talked about that. And one of the problems, if you were to just call somebody up, especially in a high profile industry of, hey, you're on a podcast.
Right.
It's going to change what they say.
Right.
And in the spirit of disarming and creating a place where people can be honest and vulnerable, because you're asking for real stuff. That's one of the reasons she didn't do the podcast.
That makes
thought about that a little bit.
That says a lot about her. And actually, I mentioned this a couple times on a couple other episodes, but I have a young man who was at Vanderbilt when he first reached out. He'd been listening to my podcast. And what was really cool about the way he reached out is he said, hey, Mr. Henningsen, just want to let you know I've been listening to your podcast. My interest in private equity first really started to germinate when I picked up the podcast and started listening to it. I reached out and have talked to 7 of your podcast guests prior to reaching out to me. So they'd done this proactively on their own, very much like your daughter. I have and this ties it back to you, I've had a summer internship at Mangrove Equity. Then he went on later now he's working at Truist and in Atlanta, and he's interviewing for private equity positions for his next step and sending me information. Hey, how would you do this or that? Or do you know anybody at this firm? You're looking at a person who was curious and they were looking for an edge in this game that we're playing in the private equity space. So he's very curious and hungry to learn, willing to pick up the phone and call random people who he's never met and ask questions, and then continue to work hard and sponge and add value. So now I have something new that I'm working on that I'm actually asking him for his advice, which is just super cool. And I've never met him in person. And there's at least another 50 stories like that over my 4-year journey of doing this podcast, where I've interfaced with young professionals who said that it helped them prepare for a job getting on a Canadian pension fund, and another kid from Europe who's in school. And just really cool vignette. What you shared about what your daughter's done is just such a good leading indicator of success in life, whether it's success in business or success as a human. That ability to listen with the intent to learn, as opposed to listen with the intent to talk.
Right. Yeah. I wish I could remember who that quote was. It said, most people listen to respond as opposed to listening to understand. That's probably a more elegant way of describing curiosity. Watch a presidential debate, and we talk about terrible listening. They're not trying to understand the other person's position. They're just trying to make sure they spout their soundbite.
Right.
And the unfortunate thing is that is the dialogue that's front and center in the world that we live in. That's not how life and relationships work.
Right.
And presidential debates are fundamentally and foundationally useless in my book, but.
That's right. Well, they give good zingers for the media to latch onto. And
oh, good. You need more zingers in the media.
Exactly. You've mentioned a couple quotes already, but I'm curious because it's a question I ask every guest. Do you have any new quotes, mottos, or what gets you up in the morning, gets you going? What drives you today?
Well, really good coffee and Wordle. That's my morning routine. I'm getting out of bed thinking, I'm knocking this baby out in 3, maybe 2.
Nice.
A good cup of coffee. As my brain gets older, that's like the Kickstarter on my old brain. From a quote point of view, there are 2 that I find myself thinking about a lot. One's Linus Pauling. He's one of very few people who have won 2 solo Nobel Prizes in 2 different fields. But his line was, the best way to have a great idea is to have a lot of ideas. And I like that. I think there's some truth to that. And I think I'm also somebody who will have one idea and dig my heels in and continue pushing that idea. And it's a good life skill for me to step back and say, no, you need to have more ideas. You don't just need to filibuster on the one thing that you latched onto. Try different stuff. And the other one is Cormac McCarthy from No Country for Old Men, is you never know what worse luck your bad luck saved you from. It's an important way to roll through life. I don't care if it's the summer flight, the thunderstorm that came up that got canceled, and you're stuck in the Charlotte airport for an extra 8 hours. If you look at that as a victim, your blood pressure's going up. You're going to stress out the other relationships in your life. And if instead you look at that and say, oh, there's something I'm supposed to be doing here. And maybe there's somebody that I'm supposed to meet here. Or maybe I just need to put my head down and read my book and decompress, and I'll catch the flight tomorrow. Sort of reframing the little annoyances in your life that add to your stress and shorten your life. I don't want to say just let life happen to you, but roll with the punches a little bit better. That's the other one I spent some time thinking about.
You have no idea how much that resonates with me. And I drive my wife crazy because she calls me Patty Positive. But it is like, for those that know me well, I say this a lot, but serendipity happens to me all the time. And I think partly because my antenna's up for it. And it's that way of looking at things that happen as a reason that they happened, and as opposed to a bad thing. And I love that quote.
I think the only book that I have read in every decade of my life, A Prayer for Owen Meany, which is also fun for me because it's very New England centric. But in terms of thinking about coincidence and serendipity and purpose, it hits on the meaning of life, some big stuff, but there are just some wonderful thoughts. I'm actually right now reading this book for, I think, the 6th or 7th time. I'm getting 50 new ideas and thoughts out of it right around that topic. And I think there's a reason that great authors, lots and lots of great authors, write about this exact topic, and there are great stories around it.
Jay, I've really enjoyed our conversation, as I always do, and wish we could spend more time together. Although I wouldn't have time to do my day job if we spent a lot of time together. We'd have so much in common. I know that Plexus' stated motto or quote is, Plexus helps small companies do big things.
Yep.
And my question that I always ask at the end of my podcast is, if I'm a owner of a business, or maybe co-owner, tell me why I would partner with you versus other equity sponsors. There's, as you said in the beginning, there's thousands of different options for an owner of a business to partner with somebody on the private equity side. And I think this statement that Plexus helps small companies do big things is a great lead into that. Can you talk to us a little bit about why you're valuable to small companies?
To why pick us? I think it's why pick anybody. The idea of going out and searching for capital. There's trillions of dollars of private capital looking to invest in private companies. And to my eye, I've not found anybody who can argue that mine's greener than yours. It's not the capital, right? And we all run the same model. We all use the same lenders for the leverage part. I mean, if you took all the models run in the middle market and could score them, the standard distribution would be tiny, right? All of the other stuff, all of the soft stuff around the quality of the partnership, the quality of the people, the alignment, that's why you pick a partner. one of the things that I'm most proud of at Plexus is that we are leaning into that and leading with that. The business owners, the first deal that we did, I think we'd known the business owner for 5 or 6 years. We'd done 5 or 6 deals in his industry. We first began interacting with him in the spirit of, you're not the right deal for us today, but how can we help you achieve what you want to achieve, making connections and advising, and then thereby building up a whole bunch of trust and history, where eventually he got to a point where he said, wow, I can see myself being partners with you guys. And it's been a wonderful partnership. And it's hard, right? The job of investment banks is to accelerate that get to know you process in as compressed and as rushed a timeline as possible, and also maximizing price. And it's really hard to do. One of the things I love about our MO at Plexus is the answer is always, you need 3 more months? No problem. Come see us. Bring your wife to come see us. We will get our significant others and all go to dinner. Bring your accounting team or your legal team. If they're the ones who are worried or really want to know what kind of people they are, come see us, or we'll come see you. And that patient, we want to answer as many of your questions before you make this decision, because this might be the most important financial decision of your life, is who your next partner is. That's why people pick us. And we're not afraid of an auction. And we got a bunch of deals in an auction process that we're running hard at and trying to accelerate the partnership evaluation. But I think what distinguishes us is our willingness to be patient and to take the time required to build a really strong relationship before the deal. Help small companies do big things it's a theme reflected in a lot of what I've been reading, especially during COVID. Is there all these wonderful big stories captured in tiny moments. And like you could take Benioff's City of Thieves, which is set in late in World War II, and I think it's in Stalingrad. And there's a soldier who's got to go get a dozen eggs for a wedding cake. It's a tiny story in the context of one of the world's hugest conflicts. Is this little tiny story of this one task, of this small story. And I think that's a little bit of what happens in the middle market. I am not trying to find the next Facebook or Uber or, I'm not trying to build a massive company. I'm trying to find a really cool niche company with a couple dozen amazing people that are trying to do something big in their industry. And I don't care if anybody else cares about it. I'm going to care about it, and they're going to care about it, and it's going to matter in their industry. Is it ever going to get a headline? I don't know. But to help that little company do the stuff that helps that little company grow and helps the industry advance and helps those people advance and achieve all the small goals that they want to achieve for their lives and their families, that's why you do private equity. And don't get me wrong, the guys working at the top of the food chain that are going to come up with the next amazing car company or battery technology, those will change the world. And that's great. But I think helping a little company do the big things that matter to them in that company, that's why we do this. And there are these amazing, beautiful stories captured in these tiny companies and these tiny communities that will make a huge difference in a small number of people's lives and can also be really financially successful.
This has been an incredible time spent with you. And as I said, I love these conversations and look forward to episode number 202. We got to keep the run going.
Love it.
Your analogy and description of why to partner with you is just so perfect. And it reminds me of a video that I played recently at one of our conferences of a little girl on the beach with 1,000 starfish on the beach, and grabbing them one at a time and throwing them back in the ocean. And some jogger jogs by and says, "What are you doing, little girl? You're never going to make a difference." And she's like, "Well, I made a difference to that one." And I kind of envision Jay like saving little starfish that are these little superstars that with just a little extra juice to them and contacts and relationships and wisdom that you and your team bring can really be successful and turbocharged.
The starfish story is a powerful one. But the difference I'd say is I don't think we're trying to save anybody. I'm just trying to go along for the ride and help. I am a big flag waver. I think the most American thing that you can do is invest in a small private company with the intent of trying to help it grow. And the opportunity to go along for the ride with these small companies and help them grow has been a gift. And you've been doing the same thing in your seat, 3, coming up on 4 decades. It's pretty awesome to get to do this.
Jay, I really appreciate it. This has been so much fun. Good luck to you and the Plexus team, and we'll definitely stay in touch and watch your journey in your new world.
Awesome. Thanks for doing this podcast, man. I've listened to a bunch of them, and it's fun to connect with some old friends. And I love the way that you try really hard to pull out something different other than just the regular mid-market stuff. Keep up good work.
Thank you for listening to North Star's Private Equity Fast Pitch. We have exciting new private equity guests lined up over the next few months. So to ensure you're receiving the latest content, make sure to like and subscribe on Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this podcast. For more information about North Star and the boutique heavy hitter events, you can visit us at enorthstar.com.